I'm going to not talk about this scientifically for a second just to appeal to more people. So you're not going to get random boners when you take this pre-workout, neither with Viagra, neither with Levitra. All it does is it essentially makes the blood flow to those areas. We are recording. Perfect. Hi everybody, I'm Damon. Today I sound a little different because I've been out of town for a week. I'm a little stuffed up from being at my brother's house. He has a bunch of dogs and that dander does kind of get to me. So unfortunately, it may be not as enthusiastic either, but not from a lack of actually wanting to talk about it, just from weird kind of voice changes that I have. So nonetheless, we're going to get into what I find to be very interesting today, actually, and it's something that's relatively well known within like the bodybuilding community to some degree, but they overlook something which I think is very beneficial, and that is the use of PDE5 inhibitors, specifically Cialis or tadalafil, as it is known as the generic name. Some people do use Viagra or sildenafil, and other people they use things like Levitra, which is vardapanil. But specifically, I always chose Cialis because it works for an incredibly long time. This is what I want to touch on, which is the half-life. So the duration of action, for each one, it's different, and they also have different selectivities for different families. And they note that the half-life of tadalafil is 17.5 hours in normal, healthy men, and it's even longer in older men who have the predisposition to inhibit the inhibitor and break it down much slower, so it works even longer. While it notes that sildenafil, aka Viagra, and Levitra are only about 4 hours each, with different potencies for each. Now, the way to think of the difference between Viagra and Levitra is Viagra is tried and true. Levitra is a little bit more specifically tailored towards sexual function. So if you are thinking about taking either one of these pre-workout or to help with the blood flow, it may be less beneficial to take Levitra, and that is due to the selectivity for specific PDE5 family inhibitors and for their abilities, not even PDE5 specifically, but other phosphodiesterase family subsects. So there's 11 PDE families or phosphodiesterase families, and of those, there are different metabolites from each family which have different interactions with muscle cell tissue. So some of them work with smooth muscle, some of them work with the muscle cells inside of your penis, specifically the corpus cavernosum. Some of them actually work on skeletal muscle, and that is why I actually like to utilize tadalafil, aka Cialis, as a pre-workout agent. So if you look into any of the clinical literature, one of the things that they actually will have people withdraw from the studies from is from lower back pain. And if you're not sure why you'd be getting lower back pain, it is from the constant rush of blood. If you've ever done heavy deadlifts, you know what I'm talking about. When you get heavy deadlifts, it's almost debilitating how much blood there is in your back, and it's excruciating to try to like stand up or like walk around and not look like you have a stick up your ass, but it really is. And the untrained, uninitiated sort of elderly man who notices now that he has a debilitating back pump might say, this medication kills my back, doc, I can't do it, what do you recommend? And he's like, oh, well, okay, lay it off. And one thing to note too with this is that you can typically remedy that by having more taurine, more water, higher intakes of your electrolytes, and other intracellular osmolytes, like not just taurine, but a sufficient amount of creatine, good amount of L-citrulline. The L-citrulline is obviously going to help encourage blood flow everywhere, but the addition of taurine with that will help freely circulating all of your blood. I typically take about 4 grams of taurines on deadlift days specifically. Sometimes if I do legs, I know I'm going to have to do squats, I will do 4 grams pre-workout, as well as like 1 full gram afterwards, just to make sure I'm good, and I don't want to get that debilitating DOMS that could come potentially after. But typically you only see it when you're training. But when it comes to the utility of things like Cialis pre-workout, you can see that even if you take 1 tab every other day, within a week you're going to notice some incredible results. And I'm going to share some videos with you guys today about what you can sort of expect in terms of vascularity. So I have a few videos here. Obviously you'll see this one because this was at the peak of my sort of shred down cycle in bulk. Obviously, if you haven't seen the video on what it took to get my absolute leanness, that video is going to be placated and occurred up here. But this was essentially test trend, a little bit of IGF-1 LR3, as well as a little bit of Masteron, alongside of a Cialis tab every other day at 10 milligrams. I was very fortunate to have a generic that came in a little blister pack that didn't have the film coating, so I could just bust it in half. Not have to worry about the gelatin because obviously I'm vegan. And then from the induction of that, I was able to utilize the tablet itself in a very easy manner. Now, it's not exactly 10 milligrams because sometimes you break it out and it's in that little oval shape. It's kind of hard to get it, but for the most part, roughly 10 milligrams a day seems to be the sweet spot for me, as well as most of my buddies that I do recommend that to whenever they want to have something that helps them get a little bit more vascular and a little bit more veiny. I do have a fair few other videos I'm trying to find. I'll probably put them in post-editing if I can find the one that I really like, because I was just so veiny, it was gross. So you can see the screenshot from that in my post on Citrulline on MindlessAndEasy.com. If you haven't seen that, I would highly recommend that. One, you can go to my blog, read up some stuff. I'm going to be putting more content on the blog in 2022. I've started, and I have about 6 different blogs posts started. I'm going to schedule them out for every other day, and the goal is to get at least 15 articles published a month, so I'm probably going to do that all in like one sitting, get about 30 of them queued up, and then continue forward and moving forward with that. But you can see here that just the vascularity, not only my like hands, which are always pretty veiny, I mean for the most part they are just sufficiently veiny, but you can see that this was obviously after a workout, but my bicep pains are peaking. I didn't do anything like taking the sodium and the pre-workout and yada yada yada. It was just Angel Dust pre-workout, which I took a scoop and a half of before I did this, and I'm pretty veiny in my forearms. Alongside of that though, I have another one from when I was modeling shirts for Decade Nutrition. I didn't really have a model to do that, so I would just take my shirt off, change it, put this on Instagram like, hey, buy a shirt pretty please, because I bought a lot of these and I didn't have the print on demand business, Taste My Asthma, where I could actually do that myself. So it was pretty interesting to say the least. And when it comes to the selection of choice, some people will opt for Viagra, taking that pre-workout, just because the half-life is so short that they can do that every single day. Because, as much as we all know to a very good degree, you should be taking rest days, but a lot of people are just so gung-ho on being hardcore and doing it 7 days a week that they don't really care about the potential loss of outcome, and that, just being on the grind site really does work for them. So, they'll take a Viagra, they'll take a 50 milligram, and they'll just pop it pre-workout, and they'll do that. And I don't think that that's necessarily the best thing in the world, because so just a side note too, they do talk about some of the hepatic metabolisms of it, or rather just how it works and the adverse effects of it. So yeah, they talk about this a little bit, but we're going to get into that at the end of this, but I just saw that and it kind of caught me off guard. But to the degree that it is beneficial to be using things like Viagra or Levitra versus Cialis, I feel that the induction of Viagra every single day isn't as healthy in terms of not only just having the drug exposure, but having the drug exposure unnecessarily to a significant amount of time over time just seems like a waste to me, because if you're so used to that and you need to have a sort of not dependency, but I would say that technically it is dependency, but needing to have that to have a good pre-workout mentally, I feel like is a bad idea. However, having something like Cialis every other day not only helps with the nutrient flow and the blood flow, but the half-life on it is relatively long. Again, you can do this every other day, so 1, your prescription lasts you even longer. 2, you can really dial it in, and if you don't need the 10 milligrams and you get away with 5, I would say the 5 milligrams is actually perfect. When I would take the 5 milligrams a day, I would just do 5 milligrams in the morning and then 5 milligrams at 5 p.m. and I would just split that up, and it wasn't really necessary in terms of like why I did that, because again, the half-life is so long that dosing it wasn't exactly the most like necessitated part of it. But I felt like waking up, getting my blood flow, doing my morning walk, and then having it before the gym was actually really great, because then I can really notice the most of it versus just taking one bolus dose in the morning. It also wouldn't like psychologically get me amped up, like I'm gonna get sick pumps, like I'm gonna look good, like I'm already ripped, this is crazy. So there's that aspect of it as well. But when it comes to the selectivity of it and the terms of like how it'll affect your sexual drive, I'm going to not talk about this scientifically for a second, just to appeal to more people. So you're not going to get random boners when you take this pre-workout, neither with Viagra, neither with Levitra. All it does is it essentially makes the blood flow to those areas come a lot easier. So, if you're free balling and, you're just hanging out, no underwear, and you're in legs and you get rubbed the wrong way, you might be stimulating blood flow there, and you might get an erection as a result of that. Egregious amount of like stretching, like if you're doing barbell hip thrust and you're tucked under a sensitive area and that's rubbing against you, you could potentially start to feel something come on. But in terms of actually utilizing it in terms of just wanting performance enhancing benefits, if you're someone who's like in the middle of prep, for example, and you're getting ready for a show and you're peeling down, your sex drive is already in the dirt, so you really don't have to worry about it. But even if you're a high testosterone, like you're doing a lot of androgens, like, you're taking your test with your mast, with your meds, you're just feeling big and like ready to rock on the road, and you're like, oh well, I'm full of tests right now, like I'm really horny all the time, it's still not going to impact it. Even if like you see a really attractive woman in the gym, and you go, if you just see her, it's fine. But if you start fantasizing about it, yeah, you might have another story. But that's something to note entirely. It's that you're not going to end up getting boners as a result of using this. In fact, you're just going to be encouraging blood flow everywhere, and having the encouraging of blood flow literally everywhere throughout your body is just better for your pumps. So another thing that I want to really touch on is the adverse effects and some of the things that they talk about here. So the most common treatment for the emergence of the use of this drug. So the most common treatment, emergent of adverse effects, is a headache, and then they have dyspeptimia, and they have things like back pain, nasopharyngitis, myalgia, nasal congestion, flushing, pain in limb. So back pain, obviously one of the most reported things. Headaches, I've actually heard this from a few buddies, as well as some other people had mentioned that their friends get this. Is that to be expected, or is that a bad drug interaction? So that is actually very, very common. So if you're never used to having the things like the headaches as a result of the use of these drugs, or if you're just not exposed to these drugs very often and you notice that infrequently you do get them, it is solely from the PDE5 inhibitor working on very specific parts. Like there's some inside of your like retinal area which can then lead to tension behind your eyes, as well as just the flushing of blood everywhere that will end up giving you a headache. Also to note, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not an endocrinologist, an obstetrician, anything of the sort. Like, take everything I'm saying with your own dubiousness and do your due diligence in terms of your own research before incorporating something like this into one of your training habits. Obviously, when it comes to the use of this, they do talk about priapism, and if you have an erection lasting more than 4 hours, if you haven't heard if you have an erection lasting more than 4 hours, please contact a medical doctor immediately, because you can like literally get one of those boners that last for like a long time, and if it doesn't go down, you like actually legitimately need to like see a doctor. And fun story, I was taking high dose of test. Like I was taking 500 megs of test. I had also just started my exposure with things like trenbolone, so I had 140 megs of trenbolone acetate a day. I was taking the cabergoline as well as a few other things like proviron, just to really help put everything together before getting cut. And we had the weekend to ourselves. Yeah, we just kind of like stayed in bed from the night before, had sex, and then afterwards it hadn't gone down, but we were still in bed, so it ended up being like a whole like 2-hour fiasco. We took a shower together, shower sex, and then afterwards we had it was still a problem. Like I didn't like freak out or anything. Like, holy shit, like I'm still going. And like I did know that it was cause for concern, so like after like 4 or 5 times it was less strong, but it was like still up there. And that's just something that you need to be mindful of, because at the time I was like, holy shit, like it's still not going, at least it's a problem. But when I wasn't just getting ready for my day, getting ready to go to the gym, getting all my other stuff done, I had pinned and it went away. Like literally as soon as I pinned, I had such like a surge of blood there. I wasn't focused on it, and it just kind of like went down. So it could also have been just the heightened amounts of testosterone, the cabergoline, which was preventing my refractory period from going underway, and just the ability and the drive to have consistent sex was perhaps the main motivator that made it a lot easier to stay harder. And there's been times like that as well where I've just had this in my arsenal and I was using it recreationally, obviously not just for the performance enhancing benefits, but for the sexual performance enhancing benefits, and that it worked. There was a time where it was test, tren, molly, caber, Cialis, and so, just something to note, that the prolonged exposure to an erection isn't always the worst thing, but the likelihood that you could have one that continues on for too long is actually very, very bad, because you don't want to have like coagulated blood in your penis, because if you have coagulated blood, that can cause like thrombosis, and it can actually kill you. So it is something to be noted of, very, very important. One thing to note too is that I touched on this very, very briefly, but when it comes to the utility behind it, I would say that if you want to learn more about how exactly Cialis works on the skeletal muscles, you could go to places like nature.com, other websites where they'll break down like, hey, this CYP 450 enzyme has a direct interaction with this phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitor, which is tadalafil. Tadalafil then has a phosphodiesterase 5 family interaction with PDE11, and then like PDE11A3 or something has to do with the skeletal muscle interactions and the prevention of its breakdown of CGMP, or cyclic adenosine monophosphate, or guanosine monophosphate. And through these small subsect of interactions that you note that this has more selectivity for this family, which has this selectivity for the skeletal muscle, versus things like Levitra, which has a very low amount of selectivity for these families, which has this interaction with everything else, specifically for the metabolites that have to work with your penis. So I would say look into that, because again, there are specific and non-specific interactions, and they note here that these have different side drug interactions and different presences due to their chemical structure and how they work. So that is something of note. I hope you guys have learned something. I hope that this was relatively entertaining. And if you guys have any other comments, questions, concerns, please drop them below. If you don't want to have a comment on this video due to the personal nature of this, you are more than welcome to go ahead and send me a message on Instagram. My Instagram handle is just @DamonIsVegan. It's all one word. Say, hey, I saw your video on topic XYZ. I just wanted to ask you a question about it. So without any more delay, I hope that you all have had a great start to your New Year's. I hope that 2022 brings you a lot of health, longevity, and wellness. I personally am looking forward to it extensively. I'm going to see The Cure this year. I'm going to hang out with my best friend and move over into some new places. In a couple weeks, you guys are going to see that I have a new setup inside of my new room. I'm going to be moving back to Akron, Ohio with one of my best friends growing up, and I'm going to try to incorporate his experiences on these channels as well. He has been someone who's been with me side by side throughout all of this, and without him and the drive that we have to push each other to always be better, I don't know if we would really have this sort of information and this culmination of stuff together. And he's just a great dude altogether, so it's going to be pretty great. So towards the end of January, you guys might end up seeing with him. Otherwise, it'll just be a new location, and I'm going to try to encourage a lot more of my friends to come on, share experiences, maybe do like a podcast or something. But until next time, toodles.